Hello, everybody, and welcome to the South Florida Power BI user group. And first of all, thank you very much for making the time to be here with us in another great presentation. And before we get started, I would like to ask from you to please take a minute. If you're watching live stream right now this presentation, take a minute to subscribe so you can use the live chat and enter your questions for the presenter at any time during the presentation. Now, if you're watching this presentation after the live stream, do not hesitate, take a minute, enter your question as a comment and let us know any questions you have, whether live and or after the presentation. Now, for those here that are watching right now, please take a minute and use the live chat. Also, let us know where are you located at. I'm seeing here that hello, David. Thanks for David from Kentucky, Pound SML. And we have Dimitri Delise from France. Very exciting community here, folks. Continue to enter your location here on the live chat. And remember, be cordial with your fellow attendees as well as your questions here. Keep it professional and let's keep moving here. Now, without further ado, today's presenter is Meagan Longoria. Good day, Meagan. How are you?
Hello. Doing well, thanks.
All right, and welcome. Welcome. And tell us a bit, first of all, let's start with where are you located at?
I'm in Denver, Colorado.
All right, I see. And has spring sprung in Denver?
Yeah, mostly. The mountains and the foothills still have a little bit of snow, but down here it's spring, it's warm and 70 degrees or so.
Oh, quite pleasant, quite pleasant. Do I still have a chance to go get, the last ski in for the season?
I think there might be one resort still open.
All right, check that out. I'm telling you, even for the late skiers, can try it. All right, can you tell us now a bit about your presentation today?
Sure. So I'm talking about how to use storytelling in Power BI, but giving very practical advice because everywhere you go, everyone's like, oh, you have to make your data viz tell a story. But then what does that really mean? Like, how do you actually do that? What are the changes you make on your report page to tell a story? And should you always tell a story, or is that way overhyped? So that's what I'll be talking about.
All right, I see that taking out the hype, bringing in what's real, and most important, practical for all the attendees here so they can become more familiar even when or not to engage on the practice of Power BI storytelling. All right, folks, before we get started, we transition here to Meagan with her presentation. Let's take a look. Who else has joined us? All right, we got our friends the G watching live from Perth, Western Australia. It's 6 a.m. Good morning. Wow, I think it's so awesome. Hey, welcome, G, and thank you for the early start with the learning here with Meagan. And we have Ashutosh, pardon if I said incorrectly, but Ashutosh from the UK. Hi from Lille, France. And hey, we have a shout out to you, Meagan, from G, saying love your work and passion on the subject matter.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
All right, hey, thank you, G. That's it. All right, Meagan, are you ready to get started?
I am.
All right, without further ado, here we have Meagan Longoria, practical application of storytelling in Power BI. How are you now, Meagan?
All right, thanks. For those of you who aren't familiar with me, sounds like a couple people know me already. I am in Denver, Colorado. I blog at datasavvy.me and I tweet a lot. So if you'd like to engage with me, that's a great place to find me. My tweets are like 60% data and 40% dogs and Colorado landscapes. So you've been warned. I work for Denny Cherry and Associates Consulting. I'm a business intelligence consultant, so I do a lot of Power BI implementations and building of special reports that people request. And I'm also a Microsoft Data Platform MVP, which really just means I'm super plugged into the community and I like contributing by doing things like presenting. I'm also one of the organizing members of Workout Wednesdays for Power BI. We do a weekly challenge every week so far in 2021. And if not entirely data viz oriented, it is always data viz related. So we give you a data set and some requirements, and then you have to figure out how to build it. Depending on your skill level, it takes somewhere between 20 minutes and an hour or two. But all of them are out there. We post solution videos usually by the end of the week. So I hope you will join us and start practicing Power BI data visualization with our weekly challenges. It's just workout-wednesdays.com. But if you search for WOW 2021 on Twitter, you'll find us and you can see people post their reports when they get done. And it's really exciting to see what people come up with and what they think of the challenges. So now that I've introduced myself, let's get started. Think about what you consider to be the essential elements of a story. In general, for me, I find there are 5 important components. And the first is context or setting. We need to set the stage and explain the environment, surroundings, any necessary backstory. Then we have characters, the individuals who the story is about. And there's usually a main character. This is the person that really determines how the plot will develop. Next, we have problems or conflict. The plot of the story is centered on this conflict and how the characters attempt to resolve the problem. People love a good conflict. It's what makes the story interesting. And of course, if we have problems, then we need to have solutions. We need a resolution. We get invested, and then we need to know, how did everything turn out for those characters? So our 5th element is emotion. Will Storr said, a story is a description of something happening that contains some form of sensation or drama. It is, in other words, an explanation of cause and effect that is soaked in emotion. And it's that emotion that's crucial to a story. It makes you feel, and that feeling is what causes you to remember the story and potentially act on its lessons. In addition to those familiar elements, stories often have a recognizable structure. So it might be the form we see here, just beginning, middle, and end. We have a story arc. You might also recognize it as situation, conflict, and then resolution. In the beginning, we introduce our context or our setting and our characters. Then we introduce the conflict and we build it up to a climax before we come to the resolution where the conflict is solved and we all live happily ever after, at least in some stories. Another common structure for a story, especially in data storytelling, is this using the middle of the story to explain what could be and then contrast it with how things currently are. So for example, when I was in college, I studied international business with minors in computer science and Spanish and Latin American studies. I did my study abroad in Viña del Mar, Chile, and I always kind of wanted to live in Central or South America, at least for a while. But life took other interesting twists, and I currently live in Denver. But sometimes I think about what could be. And one of my favorite animals is the capybara. I don't know if you're familiar with capybaras, but they're these extra large rodents, kind of related to guinea pigs and chinchillas, but they can be 4 feet long and 2 feet tall. But they're very chill, they're very social. And there's a whole subreddit called Critters on Capybaras, where you can see all kinds of animals hanging out with capybaras. So I dream of a farm in South America where I raise capybaras. But right now, I live in Denver and I raise a cranky bulldog. I would live in a hut and enjoy being close to nature. But right now, I own a townhome in Denver that requires cleaning and maintenance and a nice big mortgage payment. Capybaras are so chill and social, but life in Denver is full of stress, and I barely even know my neighbors. So as soon as we get through this pandemic, I should sell my house, move to South America, and start a capybara farm. Then I could live a life free of super expensive housing, spend more time outdoors and be less stressed, and of course, just be friends with a capybara. So you can see how that structure can be used. It's often used with persuasive storytelling, which is something we can definitely use data to help us with. So why do we even talk about storytelling? What is the big deal about using storytelling with data? Well, first, as we just saw, there's a very logical structure. We present our background and characters, the conflict, and then the resolution. You get the information you need and then move to the next step in the story. So it's easy to, every culture has stories. We're familiar with how they go. Young children can make up stories and tell them to us at a very, very young age. And then stories are engaging. We get wrapped up in a story because we love a good conflict, and it's satisfying to see the resolution. It's why we watch TV shows. That emotion that I mentioned earlier gets us caught up in that story, and it also makes it memorable. So there are probably some stories that you remember from your childhood. For instance, I could tell you the story of the Three Little Pigs right now, even though I haven't heard it or told it in well over a decade. We want to take that power and that engagement and apply it to our data visualization. Now, if you're thinking about your reports and you're like, my sales report doesn't have emotion, that's what I want to talk to you about next. So John Schwabish from PolicyViz had a great series about what is story. What do we really mean by that? And he said something that I think is really important. He said, while many of us use the word story over and over again as we make our graphs and visualizations, we need to be more careful with that word and use it when appropriate, when we're getting people to feel deeply and when we're leading them to a meaningful climax. Joshua Smith wrote in Nightingale, which is the Data Visualization Society blog. He was the winner of a Tableau Iron Viz 2019 competition, and he got rated really highly in the category of story. But he came back and he wrote this piece, and he said, I wasn't really telling a story. And he thinks that it's important to highlight that a visualization isn't more or less powerful, beautiful, or important because it does or doesn't tell a story. So I hope you'll take those two perspectives and maybe come up with a more productive way to think about it, that not all data visualization is a story. Some things are simply an annotation. Annotations are well organized. They have a logical order. On the far side, the story has a plot with a climax and emotional engagement. So there's that conflict in the characters for people to get attached to. But in between annotation and story is narration. So this is where we describe what's going on and we frame our reader's journey, but maybe there isn't a true conflict or emotions. So if you can get your Power BI report to story, that's great, go for it. But sometimes it's just not a story. We have this tendency to do this very dry, sparse reporting that's barely an annotation. So the reason there's so much push to try to get everybody's data viz to tell a story to move further right on this spectrum is that it humanizes your topic and it makes it more relatable and more memorable and more interesting. So a lot of the time, what we're really aiming for is a happy medium where we're really providing narration instead of story. By the way, this spectrum is also from John Schwabish's blog series on PolicyViz. So again, I highly recommend you check that out and see how you feel about it. So I want to give you a reality check. If you've been struggling to make your Power BI reports into a story, or if you see people raving about storytelling and you just feel a bit puzzled, you can kind of let yourself off the hook because not everything is a true story, and that's okay. But just because we don't necessarily have a story doesn't mean we just get to throw stuff on the page and call it good. So we still need things to be organized in a purposeful way that accommodates the way humans consume information. There was a hashtag on Twitter a while back that was explain a film plot badly. And somebody wrote about Lord of the Rings, which I hope a lot of you are familiar with, big epic saga. And its group spends 9 hours returning jewelry. Totally accurate, but that leaves out a lot from the picture. And that's why people are so focused on data storytelling, because we want your report to show more than group spends 9 hours returning jewelry. There's so much more to that. It's just not always obvious with the way that we organize our information. All right, are there any questions so far or comments? Okay, cool. We'll keep going then. So if you don't have a real story, or even if you really do, my advice to you is to start with message. Message is your key takeaway. It's the answer to the question, so what? Why should someone read your report? When you're designing, you need to define your message first for the entire report. Before you start on your report, you should be able to tell me in 1 to 2 sentences why this report exists and what I should get out of it. If you can't do that, you're probably not going to have a good end product. So once you can articulate that concisely, then you can start thinking about adding visuals to your report. As you add each visual, you need to be able to explain the visual and how it relates to that overall message. If I can't explain how a visual relates to my overall report message, maybe that visual doesn't belong in the report. So at this level, this is like a whiteboard or sticky note activity. You don't need to think about chart types or anything like that yet. Just be able to articulate who is your intended audience, what idea you want to convey, your report message, and then the questions you want to be able to answer related to that topic. So I used to do an in-person pre-con that had some of this information in it, and I literally passed out sticky notes, little post-it notes, and had people work this way so that they could rearrange it and rewrite it. When you start just throwing things on the page, sometimes we get a little too attached to stuff that we just happen to make. So if you start not by designing each visual, but really start conceptually, you will have so much more success in general, but especially with storytelling. So let's take a look at a data visualization that I think does a great job with defining a message and then purposefully designing to support that message. I asked the author if I could use this because I do think it does a good job clearly articulating a message. And her message is that she wanted to know if a larger production budget made a movie more likely to get an Oscar nomination. And the answer was no. So first, she has this very clear descriptive title. in which she actually states the conclusion she's drawn after analyzing the data. Then she has nice explanatory text that provides supplementary information in support of answering this question of production budget being related to Oscar nominations. And then she has charts that clearly support the message. So on the left side, we have number of Oscar nominations, and on the right, we have production budget with movie titles in between. Everything on that page can easily be justified as supporting our message of, does a larger production budget mean more Oscar nominations? Turns out the answer is no. There's nothing extraneous. I can explain in 1 to 2 sentences why each of those things belong on the page. Now, that was easy because the author was working with static data. By the way, that visual I actually found in the Slack channel for the Data Visualization Society. So if you would like to nerd out on data viz with us, it's free to join. I learn a lot from people in there, and it's not just Power BI related, so you can kind of branch out and talk to people that use lots of different tools. But those of us who kind of work in Power BI or enterprise reporting in general go, well, that was great, but that was all static data. A lot of our reports are dynamic. The data is set to refresh on a schedule. So we can't know that sales are up this quarter because the numbers are always changing. When that happens, we have to change the way we approach the design. Whereas with explanatory data visualization, the report creator takes on most of the responsibility for telling that story or message, exploratory shifts some of that effort onto the report consumer. So we have a sort of vague plot without details of specific numbers. We provide interactive controls for the user to focus on the slice of data that's important to them. And we provide signals, things like KPIs and gauges, to tell the consumer, the report consumer, how things are going. And then we provide context. This is our background information, things the report consumer needs to know to create their own conclusions and build their own story. So there are lots and lots of Power BI reports that follow this pattern. And that leads us to a concept called story forming. Andy Kirk, who is at visualizingdata.com. He's visualizing data on Twitter as well with an S because he's in the UK. He calls this story forming. And basically, the change is just in how you think about it. You don't know the answer to your question, but you do know the question you want to answer. So instead of saying bicycle sales are up year over year, we might know that we just want to show year over year sales by product category. Even with dynamic data, we can still go for a bit of story though. In Power BI, this might mean using DAX formulas to populate chart titles and text explanations with conditional formatting. And this is where the new smart narrative might come in, or the enlightened data story custom visual. So it's as if we are telling the story, but the actual plot details are data driven. We can also add in a bit of machine learning to help pick out important data points, trends, that type of thing. So before we get into more details, let's look at a really simple example of story forming. So this is a report I made years ago. It's a pretty standard report. It's about the questions that people ask on Stack Overflow related to Power BI. And we can see the data goes through like Q1 2019. And we can see I have a few different elements on the page. I have interactive controls. So that's my slicers where people could focus on a certain year. And then as well, they can click on the tags to focus on the areas of Power BI that they may care about most. Then I have the cards and the waffle charts, and those are my signal. And then the matrix in the bottom right is also kind of formatted to be a sort of heat map, and that also counts as a signal. And then we have some line charts to provide additional information to understand more context. So this report organizes the data in a very logical order. First, I tell you, we're looking at Power BI questions on Stack Overflow. Then I tell you there were 4,361 questions asked by 2,800-ish users. And those questions received just under 4,300 answers, which is about one answer per question. And most questions are answered within a day. And Power BI questions, they don't get a lot of up or down votes. So their question score average is pretty close to 0. We can read on and see that 77% of questions get answered. Users aren't great about marking an answer as accepted in the Power BI category for whatever reason, but very few questions are marked as closed, which means they didn't meet the site's quality requirements for the question. Not enough information was given for someone to be able to answer it. So I can go on and see the number of questions asked increases over time. I can see that even older questions can still get a lot of views years later. So I deliberately set that context to help you decide whether you might want to use Stack Overflow to either learn about Power BI and ask questions, or to help other people and answer questions. And once we got through all these summary stats, I provided that context and then showed you what topics have good participation. So based on this data, DAX is by far the most popular thing people ask about on this forum. So if you struggle with DAX, this may be a good community for you to ask questions. Or if you think you're really good at DAX, you can go help some poor people struggling. But if you're really into data visualization or using Python and Power BI, there's not a lot of activity there. So this may not be the forum you want to use for that. That was pretty simple. I just made sure my elements were in the right order and everything contributed to my message. There are some cool new features that we can use that can actually, let's go to this one, help with that. This is from September 2020, and it's actually the example report that gets used in the Power BI team blog. And it's when they first introduced the SMART narrative. So this page is just showing sales across time, and we can actually close that and make a little more room there, by product. And then we can see website visits and sales, sales by product, so we can see the percentages and cancellations and returns. When you put a SMART narrative on your page, it looks at the data and it comes up with its own trends and interesting data points. So we can see revenue and visits both trended up, that's this line chart, between 2018 and 2020. We can see visits are generally higher than revenue. This bluish purple line is in fact on top. We can also see outdoors accounted for 54% of sales by product. So that's the donut chart down here. These get auto-generated, but we can actually change them. We can delete them. If I can click on it, there we go. And we could even add new ones. So I might say something like the product with the highest returns in 20 was, and then we have to define our measure. So product with highest returns in 2020 purchasing year. And there we go, it was outdoor. So this could be anything. This could be dynamic titles, or it could just be trends. You can have 10 of these in here, you can have one. It's up to you, but this often helps with our narration, even when we have dynamic data. The other thing we can do is just use conditional formatting for our story forming. We have conditional formatting. Oh, that one. In place here in this report. So this is actually using the sample human resources data set from the Power BI team. And it was originally, you might have seen, let's see if it'll flip over this report before, if it loads. And I wasn't a fan of these visualizations because I didn't feel like they were telling me what I needed to know. So in a previous webinar with Rob Farley, we each remade this information into something more meaningful. And one of the things that I did was make these dynamic titles. So first I have the active employee count split up by full-time versus part-time, and then separations versus new hires. Are we generally, if separations are greater, our active employee count would go down over time. And then we look at turnover. Is it voluntary or involuntary? Are people leaving because they want to or because we fired them? We've also got gender diversity here, and normally there should be other genders, but in this data set, there's only 2, so sorry. But watch what happens as I filter. I'm going to filter just to the age group of 50 plus. So we saw some of the data changed, but now we see separations have exceeded new hires over time. If I undo that, new hires have exceeded separations over time. That is all conditional formatting. So there we go. If we look at the title, we'll see it's got the little FX there because it's got conditional formatting. It's taken a second to open. I'm going to close my previous one and try to give my computer a little more memory back there. There we go. So we're formatting our title text based on a field value, and it says title actives over time. And that's actually in my measures. So what I did was I created a few DAX measures specifically for the titles in this report. And it doesn't really matter what my DAX measure is. In this case, I just looked at the minimum date in the chart and the maximum date in the chart. And if the first date, the value was less, then we said it increased over time. This is for this top chart. If the value was greater, it decreased. So I'm just getting the difference between the first point and the last point, and then doing a switch, and then using that to populate the text. So if we look at the new hires have exceeded separations, it's the same thing. So I have a measure called change in actives, and I can just look at the sign, is it positive or negative of that? And then based off of that, that's how I determine my text. But this could be any DAX, whatever kind of DAX you write to make this title actually kind of state a conclusion instead of just being generic employee count over time. So that in itself can help you move from annotation to more of narration. Any questions so far?
Yes, we do. And we have a start off with a comment here from from the DG is also the authors need to be aware of the audience. She said, I think audience target is really important for reports. And
Yeah, absolutely.
also going through here, we also have, yes, the G also likes the titles are a really good feature. And as you just described it here, using the switch inside DAX, describing pretty much step by step how to do a dynamic title. Next, we have Tom. He's asking about, have you any suggestions for useful resources to follow up on the technique and tools you have described? He means that he has used the conditional formatting in Excel, but wouldn't have thought to apply it in Power BI. Because I saw that you just described that, right?
Yeah, so I kind of have the same demo in a webinar with Power BI Days where we spent a little more time on it. If you want to check that one out, it's on YouTube as well. Otherwise, the Power BI documentation talks about conditional formatting. The other way to do this is to actually use a smart narrative. That first thing we showed, you can use it to make dynamic chart titles that kind of sit above the chart. So either way works. I think I still prefer the conditional formatting way right now because it stays within the chart container instead of being separate. But either way is a valid approach.
All right. So I hope this addresses Tom's question. Here we also have another one from Deji. In the decomposition tree, it shows the 50 plus purple color. How did you do that?
So that is all actually set in the settings. So for the data bars, so I just made my positive bar be green and my negative be purple. There's no fancy tricks there. It's just part of the visual.
All right, cool. So that answers the question from Deji regarding the composition tree. It shows the 50 plus purple color and how did you do that. All right. Okay, and you also answer Tom, and just as a follow-up, folks, feel free to subscribe, like the video, and engage this presentation live by using the live chat and entering your questions there, comments, and interacting with other attendees as well and the presenter. All right, so it's all you now, Meagan.
All right, we're going to keep going then. So that report had a sense of narrative, but it wasn't quite a story. But regardless of if it's a full story, what we actually want to do with our visuals and pages to tell a narrative or story in our reports is somewhat the same. So first, I want to tell you about what actually inspired this presentation. And it is a Microsoft publication from actually back in 2016. So Microsoft published this research paper called Emerging and Recurring Data-Driven Storytelling Techniques. And what they did was look at the techniques used by data viz practitioners to tell a data-driven story, regardless of visualization tool used. They did look at a lot of like magazine and web publication type stuff. So there really aren't any, Power BI reports in here necessarily. But I really like this paper because it's very practical and applied. So I'm going to talk you through the 4 categories that they found in this paper and then show you examples. So they have examples that they noted in the paper, and then I made my own examples in Power BI. And so you'll notice that some visualizations use multiple techniques that cross categories, while others just use one. So I'm going to go here and the paper is a PDF. And we're not going to sit here and read this, I promise, but I want to show you a couple things that are in there. So they actually have screenshots of some of the examples. And then they have this, zoom in a bit here, really nice chart. So they've cataloged every sample they looked at, and then these are their 4 types, 4 categories of storytelling techniques. So communicating, narrative, and explaining data. There are different ways to accomplish that, and so that's kind of the subcategory, the actual technique that's listed after it. So you can see a lot of these do cross all 4 techniques. Some of them only use 1 or 2. A lot of these, even though this was written in 2016, are still available for free online. And so we're going to look at a few of them. But if you go and get this paper, in the references, a lot of them have the URLs. So you can go and check out more than just what I'm going to show you today. So highly recommend that. And we're going to look at the first technique. So the first category is just called communicating narrative and explaining data. All you do is you intersperse text, video, or audio with visualizations. So this is pretty typical of news, magazine articles, that type of thing. And we're going to look at 538. This article on 538 as our first example. So we can see it's an article, it's got paragraphs of text. And then in the middle of the text is our first chart. And then we have some more text and a heading and text and a heading and text, and then another chart. And then more text and another chart. So that's really the crux of this technique. You just have either, in this case, we have text and then visuals. It could have been video and then visuals, or sound and then visuals. Any of those work. The way that I did this is, get this refreshed here. I made a report about my dog. Let that load for a second. So I will say you probably don't want to make, I've seen people try this, and this is why I'm warning you. In Power BI, you can change the page size, and you can make a really, really long page, just one long page. But when you do that, it can cause excessive load times because everything that's visible on the page has to load when you first open it. So it doesn't always provide a good user experience. Or if you click on a slicer, now everything on Earth is going to reload because you have it all on one page. So I will say that yes, it is possible, but you'd have to be very careful to make that work without causing a bad user experience. Sorry, I pulled all these up beforehand so they'd be ready, but they seem to be kind of angry. We'll try it one more time. So I'll tell you a little bit about Izzy while this loads. Izzy is currently taking a nap, so she's not out here. Usually she's walking behind me. I rescued a dog at the very end of April 2020 because I lost my previous dog to cancer about a month before that. And I figured, I'd rather get a dog while I was home. I work from home anyway, but I travel. But since we were all staying home, I wanted to get a dog then so that I would have time to, get her settled into the house and everything. And so I went looking for another bulldog, but I wanted to try getting one from a rescue first instead of going to a breeder again. This looks like it will load, so that's good. There we go. It's almost there. So Izzy came from Foothills Animal Shelter in Golden, Colorado. And because she's a rescue, I didn't really know what kind of dog she is. It just said bulldog mix. So she looks kind of like a bulldog, but she's not like my previous English bulldog because she has real legs. We're missing a visual, but that's okay. There it goes. She's definitely at least part bulldog because she's brachycephalic, which means she has a smushy face. But she's not so squatty like an English bulldog. At first, I thought maybe she was a bulldog boxer mix. But I sent Izzy's DNA to one of those sites where you can get your dog's DNA done, and her DNA results came back as 100% Old English Bulldog. That does actually kind of look like her body type, so I could maybe be on board with that. It may not be the exact same percentages, but the foundation of this breed is that they are half English Bulldog, and then within that remaining other half, it's 1/3 Bull Mastiff, 1/3 Pit Bull Terrier, there we go, and 1/3 American Bulldog. Maybe this picture will load. There we go. Pit Bull Terrier, Bull Mastiff, and American Bulldog. So I could probably buy that. I could see that in her. Old English Bulldogs, they're not a recognized breed if you get into like all the AKC stuff everywhere because they were actually developed in the 70s. They're fairly new. And the reason that they came about is because people were trying to recreate what the English Bulldog, the little cute squatty guy with the tooth sticking up, looked like before we genetically destroyed that breed. Bulldogs were not always so round and portly, and I had an English Bulldog before it and I loved him, but he had a ton of health problems. So they were trying to create a breed that was back to the healthier version of this dog. And so that's why they exist, which gives me some hope for Izzy. She's definitely more athletic than an English Bulldog. We go hiking together when it's not too warm out, and she can hike about 5 to 7 miles and be perfectly fine. So that's my report about Izzy. But you'll notice I did text, and then I'm including pictures as part of my data since the report is about what she looks like, and then text, and then visualization, text, visualization, text, visualization. And that's really all there is to it. So this is a pretty easy technique to implement within Power BI. You don't have to make it like the big, long article style at all. The second category of techniques is called linking separated story elements. And all you do is imply some relationship either through interactivity or color or animation. And so that's actually pretty easy to do with report themes in Power BI, and then as well as actions and buttons or shapes. So I'll show you the report that they examined. That is an example of that. And this is from 2015, so it is about gay rights in the United States, and we now all 50 states have marriage, which is why the outer ring is now full, and they put a note at the top. So the way this works is in this chart, each color represents a topic. So red, I'm going to find Colorado here. Red is marriage, yellow is hospital visitation, blue is adoption. So my state has quite a few rights. There are some others that do not, that are not that far away. Wyoming, just north of us, isn't quite there yet. So I can look at this and then I can scroll down and go, oh, I'm going to check out adoption. So they use the same color as they did in the top chart to talk about adoption down here. And then they break it up into regions. So Southeast, Northeast, Midwest, Northwest, Southwest, and there's Colorado again. So all they did was just link through color. I did something similar, and this is of course it's going to load again. There we go. This is a report I made a couple years ago about my company that I work for now. I sent out a quick survey to my coworkers and I put information in forms to have them answer. And then I used the results to make this. So you can learn about my company. We're headquartered in California. You can see there are a few new-ish people, and then Denny, my boss, has been there since he founded the company. And this data is a couple years old. I actually just sent out a new survey so that I can make a new one. My coworkers are very accomplished. I really enjoy working with them because they are really involved in the community and they're super smart. So you can see that in the awards and achievements. We're very experienced with SQL Server. You can see some people have over 20 years of working with SQL Server. And then most of us have organized a conference, a tech conference, all of us really. And then most of us have led a user group at some point. We're also all pretty addicted to caffeine, so we added some fun questions so you can learn about us. So I can click into any one of these. There we go. And this one, I have a little funny quiz in there, but we're not going to do the quiz. We're not going to do the guessing game. There we go. So you can see we've spoken at collectively a lot of conferences, over 600. Lots of people have VMware vExpert Awards and MVP Awards. A lot of us have authored books. We've authored a ton of blog posts. And a lot of people are paid for speaking or writing. And then I asked everybody to share an accomplishment of which they are proud. So some of them are personal. They fly airplanes. Some of them were just being a user group president or becoming an MVP. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to click into fun facts. Sorry, my browser seems to be a little angry with me. Or maybe just my computer in general. We'll see. So these were our fun facts. I asked people some personal things that they were willing to share. And we started with how many human children people have had versus pets. Sleep preferences. I'm definitely in the I just like sleep category. I'm not really a morning person or a night owl. Just let me take a nap. We're about even on iOS versus Android. There's our coffee consumed per day. I'm the 1 cup. Number of countries visited, because pre-pandemic we liked to travel a lot. And then several of us like cycling. We talk about bike parts and pretty places to ride at work. And a lot of us like dogs. Monica has cats and Denny has bunnies. So that's our fun facts. Notice the gray color that I used here is the same gray color that I used on the main page of the report. So I linked both through color, these same colors, as well as interactivity in that you clicked into a category to get into it. All right, third technique. It's called enhancing structure and navigation. So this means we use buttons. You can do previous, next kind of buttons, or if you've ever heard the term scrolly telling, we'll look at a scrolly telling example in a second. Breadcrumbs, where you can see, where you've been from your clicks, or just plain menu selections. So a lot of times when people talk about building an app-like experience inside of Power BI, that's kind of what they're talking about, is you're using some kind of enhanced navigation. So we're going to look at this report from Bloomberg, and it's in an article called Scientific Proof That Americans Are Completely Addicted to Trucks. And this is an example of scrolly telling. So we see our little scroll here. So as we scroll, I'm scrolling with my mouse, you see the visualization changing and then new information pops up to the left. And we can keep going for a while and it'll change. And we'll actually come back to that in a second. But that's what we mean by scrolly telling. Again, this is one of those things that there are multiple ways to implement the category of techniques. And scrolly telling, if you do it in Power BI, means you put everything on one page. So you could have some pretty excessive load times. I did see one in the data stories gallery that actually didn't have horrible load times. So it can be done, but be very careful if you try to do that. A lot of people don't like to scroll. They'd rather click buttons to have the data load. But you could have users with the opposite. Like when we read news articles, most people would rather scroll than click next. So that's kind of where that comes from. And I'm going to show you a report that I made about Denver traffic. And this is a couple years old now, but it remains true as far as the conclusions. So what I did was I loaded data from like the Denver public data site about what conditions lead to higher Denver traffic accidents. And I broke it up by time, location, and then driving conditions. And so people think, oh, it must be because we get snow and, it's got to be during rush hour and it's just really, bad driving conditions. Well, it turns out accidents happen in the afternoon between 3 and 6 most often. More accidents happen on Friday than any other day, probably because it's also just the highest traffic day. Accidents occur more in the spring and the autumn than the winter. But spring and autumn both may contain snow. Sometimes the temperature changes by 40 degrees in a day. So, but it's really not like it's because we got stuck in the snow kind of thing at all. And it's not rush hour traffic in the morning trying to get to work. It's Friday afternoon. Maybe people are trying to get to the slopes or something. So then I can go look at location. Well, if we look at traffic accidents by location, the highest number of accidents occur. We have 2 highways in Denver that intersect right near downtown. So if I uncheck this neighborhood, you can see it'll zoom out a little bit in a second. And you can either, if you live here, you are familiar with the neighborhood, we can find a new, it's getting stuck. You can find a neighborhood, there we go. So that's basically the shape of Denver. We have this little annexed piece that goes up to the airport. The airport is in the far northeast part of town. And so it looks crazy because we have a lot of accidents without clicking on anything. See if it'll come back there. And we'll do Central Business District. So that's basically downtown. And see if it'll load. There we go. So that's our Central Business District. If we zoom out just a little bit, you can see I-25 here and I-70. And if I unfilter, we end up seeing all the accidents along the highways. But there's actually something going on in Central Business District where there's a bunch of accidents right here on these little neighborhood downtown streets too. So we find out that it's kind of where you would expect things to happen. The places with the most traffic is where accidents occur. And then if we look at, well, what kind of roads were we on? Were we, in the foothills where it's really hilly? No, most accidents take place on dry, level roads in daylight when it's not slick. It's mostly because people are following too closely and they're just bad at driving. That's the answer, is we tailgate and no one pays attention. So that's what causes most of our accidents. My car's been rear-ended twice since I've lived here for the last 5 years. The first time it got totaled and I got a new car. So it definitely, my experience fits in with this data perfectly. But notice all I did was decide the order in which I wanted people to examine this report. I wanted them to look at time, both time of day and time of year. And then I wanted them to look at the locations where they happened and then the driving conditions. So these are my navigation buttons. And then our last technique is called controlled exploration. And it's really just allowing a few dynamic queries so that your user can make some selections to explore in a constrained manner. It's not a free-for-all, but sometimes it's a separate exploratory piece after kind of a more of a longer narrative. And that's what we're going to look at in The Guardian. So first we have this whole thing about, does winning Best Director kill your career? And we can scroll through and we get lots of data viz here. But then at the bottom, we have this Explore the Data button. And once we do that, we get a little more interactivity. So I can choose whether or not to show an IMDb rating. And then I could search for a director. So let's say, see if I spell names correctly today. Who should I pick? Let's do Scorsese. And hopefully I spelled score. Nope, I did not spell it correctly. Let's go find him. So if I'd been able to spell his name, I could have searched. Or not. It must not be working right now. But I can hover over. Let's find Wes Anderson. So Wes Anderson was nominated, at least, for the Grand Budapest Hotel, but he also did Moonrise Kingdom, Fantastic Mr. Fox, Darjeeling Limited. So we can choose how we want to see this data. We also had controlled exploration in this Bloomberg article. So I could choose, how do I want to group my data? By truck versus car, by major brand. I could flip that. Let's do that. I could look for a specific car. So I drive a Mazda CX-5, and I can find my car here. So this is what we mean. We didn't just like dump out some data and say, go for it, or just put a giant table. There are three things that I can do. I can group by, I can color by, or I can search for a particular car. So that's the controlled exploration. We're going to see, I did this in a summary report where I kind of made something similar for an actual client a while back. We'll see if this one loads. It might not. I tried to bring it up in Power BI desktop behind the scenes to see if that would load better than these, but it looks like we're going to give it just a second. But basically, I pull data from, they have databases in Azure, and we pull data from log analytics about these databases. So some of them have a lot of activity. Some of them are just hanging out. But we could see all the logins, how many databases we're monitoring. If there's a lot of failures are because people have automated programs trying to log in and they put the wrong password in. But we have this explore the metrics thing. So this is my controlled exploration. I gave all the metric names that I have data available from log analytics for these databases. And then I can choose either a particular database and see the data change. And then I can decide whether I want to see min, max, or count. So for storage, maybe I don't want to see it in bytes or megabytes. I want to see it as a percent. So this database really has maxed out at like 25%. I can also look at, let's find CPU percent. Some of these databases are using DTUs, so it's a little, you'd have to use a different metric, but now I've switched it so I can see my DTUs. And there was something for a while where they were doing crazy things and maxing out CPU, but now they've just been hanging out around 50% here. So no matter what I want to see, I could also do min, which in this case isn't as interesting, but that's, you know, my choice as the user to choose my aggregation. We could see, you know, the connections that failed. So I've given the user 3 things they can change: what metric they want to see, what server and databases they would like to look at, and how they want to aggregate the data. Does it make sense to count the connection failed? Yeah. So one day somebody was querying a database and they just had a whole bunch of fails. And then ever since then, it's been fine. And then you can change the time period as well. So that's my version of controlled exploration. So that was our 4 categories. There we go, of applied storytelling. There we go. This is a good spot to stop and see if there's any questions. Yeah, the paper from Microsoft. So I'll tweet out a link when I'm done, and I'll also give it to Adriano to post it. But if you search for the title, it's actually on Microsoft's site. So if you do emerging and recurring data-driven story techniques, you'll find it from Microsoft there too. But yeah, we'll make sure we get a link out there for you. Yeah, thanks for joining us. Probably the Guardian one. Yeah, that's a good point. I don't use Q&A a lot in production because it demos really well, but it's harder to keep up to date. But they've made a few changes over the last like 6 months to a year that made it better. See if I have a Power BI report open. That's not that one. Let's try this.
Oh, sorry about that. For interrupting here. Yeah, somebody couldn't hear me here. So what I just said is I just stated a question from Dimitri saying that Dimitri says I have a question about Q&A in Power BI, how to ensure that Q&A has an added value in a storytelling. And that's what Megan is checking on.
Yep, so if I can get it to open soon-ish, maybe if I cancel that, it'll make it go faster. When you do Q&A, you can set synonyms, and I might actually have it on this one, we'll see. You can set synonyms, and you can set kind of pre-authored questions. So if you put either a Q&A box on your report. I'm going to see if this will finish anytime soon. It's kind of a big report. So what I would do is like kind of prompt them. There's my Q&A button. So I put a little Q&A button in here so that people could go ahead and ask their own questions. But what you have to remember with Q&A is like you need to be naming things so that they're very obvious and so that it's easy to ask questions. And you need to be constantly checking the questions that people ask so that if anybody ever tries to ask a question it can't answer, you go in and you add that to the questions. You make it like another featured question and you make sure it works. So for Q&A, you have to be able to add synonyms. Yeah, this thing is probably not going to load. My computer is officially angry at me. But I would put it kind of strategically, like give them information and pose a question and say, you know, want to know more? Click here or enter your question here and have questions pre-authored in there to make it work. If it becomes this thing that people don't know how to use, then it's not worth their effort and they don't actually try to do it. So you have to stay really on top of your phrasings and synonyms and give lots of like ideas and prompts to get people to do that sort of thing. But then you have to make sure that it gives you the right answer. So anticipate the top like 10 to 20 questions and make sure those always work. All right. So we're just going to end with a quick recap. We like stories because they're memorable and they're engaging. We remember things. I bet you'll remember that I made a dumb report about my dog more than you'll remember some boring report you saw at work just because it told a good story. But not everything is a story. Your sales report may not be a story. My database management report isn't a story, but that's okay. We can make it a narrative. We just want to get past plain annotation. We want it to be easy to consume. And most reports can be humanized more so that they lean more narrative than annotation. So regardless of if you have a true story, you can use the storytelling techniques that were explained in the Microsoft research paper that I demonstrated. And those were communicating narrative and explaining data. And that was the report about my dog. Linking separate story elements. That was the report about my company where we could drill through to see more information like how many cups of coffee we drink on a daily basis. Enhancing structure and navigation. And that was my report about Denver traffic and how we all run into each other because we're bad drivers. And providing controlled exploration. That was my database metrics report, where you could choose which metric you wanted to look at. So that wraps up the content I have for you. We'll check in just a second if there's any other last minute questions, but otherwise, I hope this helps you create better data narratives, even if they aren't true stories. And that, I hope you'll tweet me and show me what you've made recently and how you've put this to good use.
All right, awesome. Thank you very much, Megan. And folks, if you have a question, remember, use the live chat. Let us know your questions, your comments, suggestions here for this great presentation from Meagan Longoria, bringing and cover several different scenarios here for you. So let's give it a minute here and see kind of the feedback we are getting from people, Megan. I know that Tom O'Hurry just said great presentation with the fascinating insights. Thanks so much. Folks, remember, if you're watching this live, use the live chat to enter your questions. Now, if you're watching this not in real time, on demand, better said, feel free, use the comment section below the video to enter your questions, and also let us know where you're watching us from. So drop a comment in the comment section below. And remember, help us with the YouTube algorithm and guide others who may have interest on the video as well. So look forward to see your feedback on the comment section. I see some movement here on the live chat. All right, we have Julie Lyon saying thank you, Megan. We also have Samuel saying thanks a lot. Great presentation from Dimitri. And thank you all for watching it. And how long should a narrative be, Megan? It's a question here.
I don't think there's a prescribed length. It's just, can you comprehensively tell your narrative? So, I mean, it could be a chart could tell a narrative if you do it right, because you've got a nice conclusive title, and maybe the internals of your chart have some annotation about where people should look and you're highlighting something. So it could be anything from, you know, a single chart to a 50-page report. It's all in how you design it.
All right, and great info there. And as far as design, as you pointed out, folks, remember that the scrolling reports, there may be some challenges depending on how much data and interaction are happening here on the back end of Power BI, as far as what you pull, how big is that data set that's coming back as a response. So keep that in mind when you create either a single page report and or use the tabs to reference those different reports.
Yep.
All right, got Victor said, okay, Megan, you are awesome.
Thanks.
Indeed. All right. Just one quick second here, and so we can bring the mirror here to a close. Let me change this. All right, Megan, here we have you on the screen already, and I would like to thank you on behalf of the South Florida Power BI and on behalf of all the attendees. We really appreciate your assistance here. And oh, just got one more question just before. Sorry about that. So we have Julie Lyon asked, did you use DAX to change the metric dynamically in your exploration dashboard chart? And have not seen that before. So she has not seen that before. So the question is, did you use DAX to change the metric dynamically in your exploration dashboard charts?
Yes, I did use DAX. You end up creating a measure, and then based on, mine might be a little different because my table was organized perfectly, but I have one measure and then I have the measure type. So it wasn't like I had 50 different measures. It's one measure, and then the type of measure, whether it was storage or CPU percent, just filtered that measure down. Other people, like if you have completely distinct measures, you can do this in DAX and switch the measures out. We actually have a Workout Wednesday exercise that does that. So you can check that out on the site there if you want to learn how that one works. But mine was much simpler just because of the data model that I was working with underneath. It's just one measure and then a dimension that is the metric type.
All right, so that does answer the question here. And also, please, what I'm going to do is when Megan send me the copy of the list of the references there, I will add that to the section here on the description, just below the video. If you look at the description section, I will add one section under the Meagan Longoria section saying references or presentation reference. And you can all come back, check out the video, check out the references, and practice at your own pace. and really enjoy it. Julie says, thank you. All right, so I don't see any more questions there. Just as we bring to a closure here, if you're watching this video now on demand, remember, like, comment, and subscribe. Drop your question on the comments. Let us know where you're at also on the comments. And again, thank you very much, Meagan. Really appreciate on behalf of the South Florida Power BI, all the viewers here and future viewers. Thank you. I appreciate
Thank you.
it. And I also appreciate your continuous collaboration there with the community. You know, that is really great. And that is the
Thanks.
famous dog.
Yep.
All right, hey. We don't have any more questions, so bring it here to an end. So, folks, also stay tuned. We will be entering the next presentation pretty soon. That will be coming up for the month of June. And thank you for collaborating to the community by being present. And if you're a presenter, just reach out to us at the South Florida Power BI. We would like to talk to you and see if you can come in and present at the channel as well. All right, without further ado, thank you, Meagan. Thank you all. And have a good night. See you all. Bye-bye. All right, Meagan.